Hi, my name is Beth and I'm a sewing pattern designer and blogger at Sew DIY. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I made this cardigan. This cardigan goes with a series of tutorials that I've posted on my Substack. If you don't know about my Substack, it's called Sewing with Numbers, and I share tutorials for how to draft simple sewing patterns to any measurements that you desire. I've already posted tutorials for how to draft a cardigan like this, and it even includes downloadable worksheets where you can fill in your desired measurements and then draft your own custom pattern. All the posts are free to read for the first 3 months and then they go behind the paywall. So make sure to head over there soon if you're interested in this tutorial. On my Substack, I don't talk about construction a lot, so this video is going to be all about the construction of this cardigan. The design is really boxy and oversized. The hem and the sleeves are finished with bands, and then the neckline is also finished with a band that has buttonholes and buttons. The fabric is a very, very thick, fuzzy knit rib fabric, and this was actually pretty hard to work with just due to the thickness and the rib knit. It really wanted to stretch on me. So I'm going to try to share as many tips as I can throughout the video, just in case you're sewing with a similar fabric. I don't know where I got this fabric. It's been in my stash for so long, I don't exactly remember, but I think it was probably from the LA Fashion District. The buttons are these gorgeous wood buttons, and they're about 1 inch in diameter, and they are in my stash. I think I probably inherited them, and I'm just really pleased I was able to put them together with this fabric. All right, let's start sewing. All right, here I have all of my fabric cut out, and I want to quickly go over it. So first, this is the back pattern piece, and it's cut on the fold with a little scoop for the neck, and then the sleeves go in here. This is the front pattern piece, and there are 2 mirror images. So this is a V-neck cut here, and then I have 2 sleeves, and these are kind of a triangle with the tip cut off, and these are cuffs that will go at the bottom of the sleeve. So these will get sewn together. And then I have a hemband, and my fabric wasn't super wide, so I ended up cutting this in pieces. So I have a back hemband and a front hemband, and I will piece these together. Finally, I have the neck band, and this goes from the center back all the way to the hem. Here I have my test swatch, and at the beginning of every project, I like to test out my stitches and see how the fabric behaves, how it looks, and what I like the best. So first I tested a serged seam, and this is fine, but because this fabric is so thick, I also wanted to try finishing the raw edges and using a lightning stitch to stitch the seam. This way the seams can be pressed open and there's a little bit less bulk. I think it's pretty subtle. You can probably see that when you press the seam to the side, it's extra bulky, and this is a little bit flatter. So for most of my seams, I am going to press them open and use this technique. And then any seams that will be exposed and not covered by another piece of fabric, I'm going to finish them with a serger first. So my first step is going to be finishing those seams. Okay, I have my serger already set up for my fabric with the tension adjusted. And what I like to do is turn the knife off. Then I get the fabric as close to this finger as possible so that the stitching is right along the raw edge. I also want to mention that if you're sewing a rib knit fabric like this, you should test out the differential, especially if the fabric is looking really wavy after you sew it. You can try increasing the differential, which is this knob on my machine, and that might take care of the waviness of the fabric. Another option is to press the fabric after stitching, and that should help shrink it a little bit. But ideally you won't have to do that. So just before you start sewing your actual pattern pieces, test out some swatches and play around with the tension and the differential to get it looking really nice. I'm going to finish the seams for the shoulders, the armholes, and the side seams, and I'm going to do that for the front, back, and sleeves. I have the back right side up, and I'll put a front piece down, right side down, and aligning that shoulder line. And then I'm just going to put a few pins in here, and we'll stitch down each shoulder. All right, here I'm at my conventional sewing machine, and I have a walking foot attached because it will help my fabric move more evenly through under the needle and prevent waviness. For rib knit or thick fabric, you could also try decreasing the pressure of the presser foot. I'm also using a jersey needle, and I'm using the size 14 because I have a pretty thick fabric. If you have a lighter weight fabric, you would use a smaller needle. Because my fabric's really thick, I'm also going to put another piece of fabric behind my garment just to help it get moving. And this will help balance that presser foot with this thick fabric. I'm going to be stitching with a lightning stitch at a 3.0 length. You can also use a narrow zigzag stitch. I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I have this piece of washi tape here as a seam guide. So here is what that seam looks like. You can barely see that stitching. I really like the lightning stitch because it's really secure, and then this is going to be really flat when I press the seam open. And then you just want to repeat for your second shoulder. Before pressing your garment, I really recommend testing on a scrap of fabric to make sure the iron is not too hot and that you're not going to melt your fabric. So just do a little test, make sure nothing starts smelling funky or burning. When in doubt, use a lower heat setting, and you can also use a press cloth. And especially with this knit fabric, you don't usually need to press a lot. It's going to depend a little bit on the type of fabric. So, because as I've already talked about, I'm pressing my seams open for this project. Here I have the body of my sweater, and I'm ready to sew the sleeve onto the body. So I want to put these right sides together. And actually, for me, this would be helpful to mark the center point of my sleeve. I designed a symmetrical sleeve, so it's the same in the front and back. So I can fold it in half and mark my shoulder point. I'm going to mark that with a pin, and then I'm lining that up with my shoulder seam. So I'm going to pin those together right there. And then at the end, I am lining up where the seam line is, not the cut edge, because that's the way I designed it. I didn't clean up these pattern pieces to align the cut edge. I actually have a blog post on my Substack about how to clean up the pattern pieces so that you don't have to think about where the seam line is. And you can just line up the cut edges. I'm going to put a few pins in and then stitch right along this shoulder seam and repeat for the other side. So here for the underarm seam, I'm again going to use the lightning stitch. Okay, now we want to give a gentle press to our sleeve and shoulder seam. So just like before, I am pressing this open. Something I love about sewing these cardigans is seeing how these kind of triangles and rectangles all come together and form this 3D shape. Really feels like magic. Yeah, we have a little sleeve. Next, you want to fold your cardigan with the right sides together. So we have the front and the back lining up, and the sleeve is folded in half. So we're going to stitch down the sleeve seam and then under the arm to the bottom of the body, and we're stitching the back to the front here at the body. So we're stitching that sleeve and side seam. So I'm just going to put a few pins in here to hold it all together. Make sure that I have these seams aligned, and then I will stitch all the way down. Okay, now I'm ready to stitch my underarm seam, and I like to start at the sleeve and go to the hem. And of course you want to do it for both sides. Okay, this seam is stitched, and then I will gently press this seam open. Here I have my cuff, and it is folded right sides together, and I'm again using my conventional machine, and I will press this seam open, and when the cuff is constructed, it's folded back and this seam will be covered up. And I'm again using the lightning stitch, and this seam is aligned with the underarm seam in the sleeve. I'm going to repeat for my second cuff and then give these a light press. To press the cuff, I'm going to use a sleeve board, and this is a really handy tool to have for pressing narrow pieces like a cuff or a pant leg, because it's just a mini ironing board and I can slide my fabric, my little tube, right over the top, and then I can easily press just the seam and not press anywhere else. Now I want to fold this so these seams go together and then the wrong sides of the fabric are together, and this will be the bottom of my sleeve. So these two raw edges get stitched to the sleeve and the folded edge is the end of the sleeve. Okay, now I'm ready to attach my cuffs to the sleeves. I want to align the seam lines in the cuff with the seam line in the sleeve, and with a pin I have marked the halfway point in the circumference of the cuff and the sleeve. My cuff is just slightly smaller than my sleeve so that it tightens up a little bit at the wrist. My cardigan is wrong side out, and I'm going to put the cuff inside the sleeve so that it's right sides together. I usually prefer pins, but this is a really good case for using clips because we can get through all those layers. And then I'm going to align these pins and clip that together. And then as I sew, I'm going to stretch these to fit each other. Okay, I'm going to stitch all the way around my cuff and sleeve, and I'm using my serger, but I am not using the knife. I'm just going to stitch right next to the edge because my serger does not like to use the knife and go through all of these layers, especially where the seams are. It's a lot of layers. I did break a needle, alas. I think that was while trying to go through all the layers. So I think, oh my gosh, okay, that was that bad sound. I think the overlock is going to stay, but I am going to use my conventional machine and do a little more stitching just to secure this a little more. I'm going to have to use my conventional machine to try to get through all these layers and get everything stitched together. A little bit of plan B on these cuffs. My hemband is in 3 pieces, so I am going to stitch these side seams in the hemband, and again at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and using my lightning stitch. I did not finish these seams because this is going to be covered when the hemband is folded in half. Okay, I am on plan C for my hemband because my serger did not want to stitch through all of the layers. Normally with a sweater like this, I would just serge these 2 layers to the bottom of the body, but my serger broke a needle once I got to the seams. So I had to trim off a little bit and get everything even again. And what I'm gonna do is I have serged one end. So let me flip this over. So with my conventional machine, I'm going to sew these 2 edges together, And then I will fold this up over the top and top stitch it down. But I'm going to go ahead and pin these together, just one edge of the hemband to the body of the cardigan. And again, I'm only doing this because my fabric is so thick. Okay, here I'm going to stitch just one layer of the hemband to the bottom of the body of the sweater. And I'm using the lightning stitch. Here I have my hemband and I am gently pressing the seam that I stitched towards the bottom, towards the band. And then this edge is serged and I want it to just cover that seam. So I'm folding it up. This is wrong sides together, and this is the wrong side of the cardigan, or the inside. And then I just want to give it a gentle press. And then I'm going to flip it over, and from the right side, I'm going to pin these layers together. So I want my serged edge to cover the seam, and I am going to pin just above where the seam line is and through that serged edge. And I'm pinning horizontally just to hold it in place more evenly or more strongly. And I'm going to gently press and pin all the way around the bottom. Okay, I have my hemband pinned and I'm going to top stitch using a narrow zigzag stitch just close to the seam edge. So I'll be stitching just through 2 layers of fabric through the body and this serged edge of the hemband. As I stitch, I double check that the seam allowances are pointing towards the bottom of the cardigan and that they are covered by the serged edge of the hemband. So I recommend just going slow, checking that everything is in its proper place, and hopefully you can avoid any seam ripping later on. Next, I'm going to stitch the center back seam in the neckband. And I serged this, but it doesn't need to be serged because it will be folded over and covered. Here's my cardigan, and I have the hemband attached. Everything is done except for the neck opening. And here is my neck band. I actually cut my neckband on the selvage so that I can use the selvage as an already finished edge. So I want to make sure that I sew the raw edge of the neckband to the garment. So when it's finished, it's going to go around like this, and it's going to be folded in half. So I want to start by marking the center back in my sweater. This is the center back neck, and I'm going to align the seam in my neckband with the center back. This is the raw edge that I want to attach to it. And then I'm actually going to go to the other end with the hemband. I want this edge to extend 1/2 inch at the bottom and use clips or pins to hold those layers together. So I have the center and the end pinned, and then I'm going to pin the rest. And along this section, I'm not stretching the neckband at all, but I am going to stretch it a little bit around this neck edge. And I drafted it so that the neckband was just a little bit smaller, and I will stretch to fit. So you want to pin it all the way around and then stitch to the neck opening. Stitching the neckband to the body, and you want to make sure you have this 1/2 inch overlap here. This bottom edge of the neckband will be finished next. And I'm going to use a zigzag stitch for this. I'm using a width of 1.2 and a length of 2.3. I'm starting to approach the shoulder seam here, and there's a curve in the back neck. So I want to be kind of careful and go a little bit slower as I go around this edge, and I am stretching these 2 pieces to fit together. Okay, this is the right side of the cardigan, and down here at the bottom, this is still raw and we need to fold it right sides together. So you want to hold the hemband out of the way and then fold these together. And we're going to stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you want to get really close to that bottom of the hemband without stitching through it. You can hold this together with pins or clips, And you want to do the same thing on both sides and just stitch right across there, and then you'll be able to flip it right side out. Okay, here's the inside of the cardigan. This is the hem, this is the neckband, and here's that sewn seam. So we will flip this so the wrong sides are together and turn this finished edge to the inside. And this will finish the center front of the cardigan. So right now it's a little bit lumpy when I turn everything around. So I'm going to trim some of these seam allowances. I like to have this top seam allowance longer so that I have more to work with. I feel like it's easier to cover when it's a little bit longer. So I'm going to trim bottom seam allowance just by about half and do this all the way around. Over here we have a ton of seam allowances too, and it's a little bit tricky to figure out what to cut so that you don't have anything poking out. I'm going to cut this bottom one a little bit and just trim that edge. It's kind of tricky. You want to cut just enough that you reduce bulk, but that you don't create any problems for yourself. So let's take a look. I think that will be okay. I might want to trim a little bit more. I'm going to go all the way around and trim and then pin this in place so I can top stitch on the right side. I'm now going to top stitch my neckband all the way around, and I'm top stitching this edge to the body of the cardigan right next to the seam line, and this will cover any raw edges. I'm doing this the same way that I did the hemband, and I'm using my walking foot with a narrow zigzag stitch. As you go around the neckline and the back of the neck, you'll want to be extra careful and just stitch slowly around those curves because sometimes it could be a little tricky. Okay, that's now sewn into place, and we can sew our buttons and buttonholes. Okay, I am now ready to stitch the buttonholes on the right side of the neckband, and I've marked the end point of the buttonholes. I have my buttonhole foot all set up, and my machine comes with this extra part that you can use when you're sewing with bulky fabrics. You slide this extra metal part underneath, and then you sandwich the fabric in between these two pieces. And I've already done some tests, and it really did work pretty well. So I haven't used this extension on the buttonhole foot before, but I'm glad I have it. I think it actually works. Okay, this is pretty tricky to use, but I think it's easier to get the fabric into the buttonhole foot before attaching it to the machine. And it's been really tricky to mark the placement on this fabric. It just does not want to take markings. So we're going to use a little bit of faith. I just like to hold my thread and start stitching. I'm also using a knit buttonhole, which is number 9 on my buttonholes on my Janome. I recommend looking at your sewing machine manual to find which buttonhole is good for knit fabric. And then I always recommend testing it out on a scrap. Sometimes I will also put a piece of tracing paper underneath my fabric when stitching the buttonholes, and that will help stabilize the fabric while stitching. I've cut my buttonholes open using my seam ripper and my thread snips. You want to be really careful not to cut through the ends of the buttonhole. And then using pins, I've marked where I need my buttons to go. So the final step is to sew the buttons on. So I like to use a double loop of thread and tie a knot at the end. And then put my needle through. I want to get a big chunk of fabric here. And before I get to the knot, I'm going to put my needle through this loop and kind of loop the thread. So this prevents that knot from going right through the fabric. It kind of creates its own little knot here just with the thread, and that keeps it more secure. Put my needle through the shank and then just sew a few loops until I feel like it's secure. Then to finish it off, I wrap my thread just around the bottom, wrap around that bottom where you were just stitching, and then you can put the needle through your thread and make a knot. Just go like that, and then I do another knot or two to secure it. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really like how this cardigan turned out. The only thing that I am kind of unhappy with is how the hemband stretched while sewing. I really struggled with the hemband, and I think maybe if I had used a clear elastic to reinforce that seam, it would have prevented the rib knit from stretching. I also should have maybe put some clear elastic into the shoulder seams. I do have another video here on YouTube about how to sew a cardigan only using your serger, and with that cardigan I used a lighter weight fabric, and that works really well just on the serger. It's super fast and really satisfying. So I'll make sure to put a link to that down in the show notes. I'll also include links to the tutorials on Substack if you want to draft your own cardigan. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. Happy sewing!